The night my son-in-law told me I was a burden to this family, I was standing at my own kitchen sink, washing dishes from a dinner I had cooked, in a house I had owned for 31 years. I didn't say anything. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands on the dish towel, the yellow one with the little sunflowers that I'd bought at a Cracker Barrel in Tennessee back in 2009, and I walked to my room. The small one at the end of the hall, the one that used to be the guest room. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Beverly Jean Ostrowski. I'm 67 years old. I worked as a licensed practical nurse for 38 years, mostly at a regional hospital outside Columbus, Ohio, and I retired at 64 with a decent pension, a paid-off house, and 2 replaced hips. I raised 1 daughter, Claire, on my own after her father left when she was 4. I picked up double shifts on holidays so I could buy her school clothes and soccer cleats and, eventually, help her with her first year of college tuition. I did all of that without asking anyone for a single thing. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because I want you to understand what kind of woman I am before I tell you what happened. And I want you to understand why it took me as long as it did to do what I finally did. Claire met her husband, my son-in-law, at a work conference in Chicago. He was charming when they were dating. Brought me flowers the first time we met, yellow tulips, shook my hand firmly, called me ma'am. I thought, okay. I thought she found a good one. They got married 3 years later. I paid for a good chunk of the wedding because that's what you do, and I was happy to do it. I danced at the reception until my new hip ached, and I didn't care even a little bit. The first 2 years were fine. They lived 40 minutes away in a nice enough apartment. I saw Claire on Sundays. We'd go to church together sometimes, or just sit at my kitchen table and drink coffee and talk the way mothers and daughters do when things are still easy between them. Then the baby came. And then another one. 18 months later, and the apartment got too small and the daycare costs were brutal and my son-in-law's work situation had gotten complicated. A layoff, then a contract position. Then another layoff, and one Sunday afternoon, Claire sat across from me at that same kitchen table and asked if they could move in with me. Just for a little while, she said, just to get back on our feet. I have 4 bedrooms in my house. It made sense on paper. I said yes. That was 3 years ago. The first few months were okay, or okay enough that I told myself they were okay. There was noise and chaos that I wasn't used to, but I loved having my grandchildren close. I'd hear them in the morning before anyone else was up, those little feet on the hardwood, and I'd go make them oatmeal, and we'd sit together at the table in the early quiet, and it was genuinely good. But things shift, slowly, and then all at once. My son-in-law started making comments about the house, small ones at first. The water pressure in the shower was bad, the dishwasher was loud, the neighborhood didn't have great schools, and they'd need to think about that. I nodded and said things like, "You're right, I've been meaning to get that looked at," as if it were his job to evaluate the house I'd owned since before he'd ever heard of this town. Then the comments became suggestions. They needed more space. The kids needed a real playroom, maybe the room at the end of the hall, my reading room, where I kept my books and my sewing machine and the old record player my mother left me. Maybe that could become a playroom. I gave up the reading room. I packed my books into boxes and stacked them in what had by then become my bedroom, the small guest room, because somehow, by that point, my son-in-law and Claire were sleeping in the master. I still don't know exactly how that happened. It was gradual. It was always just temporary. Claire mentioned that the master bathroom had a tub and it would be easier for bathing the kids. And I thought, sure, that makes sense. I can use the hall bath. And then somehow using the hall bath became sleeping in the hall bedroom, and that became just how things were. I want to be honest about something. Claire is not a bad person. I know that's a strange thing to say in the middle of a story like this, but it matters. She got swept up. She got used to things. She stopped seeing what was happening the way you stop seeing the slow lean of a tree that's been tilting for years. I'm not excusing her. I'm just trying to be truthful. My son-in-law, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was doing. He started managing things. Little by little, he'd intercept the mail and set it on the counter with comments. "This bill is higher than it should be," as if he were paying it. He'd tell me when workmen were coming without asking if the time was convenient for me. He told me once that I shouldn't leave my car in the driveway because it leaked oil and was an eyesore. My car. In my driveway. Last Thanksgiving, Claire suggested, or he suggested do Claire, which was how things often worked by then, that I sign a durable power of attorney. Just as a precaution, he said, in case something happened to me medically, in case I couldn't make decisions. I'm 67 years old. I walk 2 miles every morning. I manage my own medications, my own finances, my own calendar. I was a nurse for nearly 4 decades. I know what a durable POA means. I know what it means for the person handing it over. I said I'd think about it. He brought it up 3 more times over the next 2 months, each time with a new angle. It's just practical. You're not getting any younger. You wouldn't want the kids to have to deal with probate. What if you have a fall? What if you have a fall? I started keeping a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just a small spiral notebook I kept in my purse. Dates, times, what was said. Nurse habit. Document everything. You never know when you'll need it. The night everything broke open was a Tuesday in March. I'd made dinner. Pot roast, the kind that takes all day, with carrots and potatoes and the good gravy that my mother taught me to make. I'd set the table. The kids had eaten and been taken upstairs for bath time. It was just the 3 of us left at the table. I was telling Claire about a woman from my old hospital ward who had called me out of the blue. We'd worked together for 15 years and I hadn't heard from her in 2. And she was moving to Tucson, and it was just nice news, the kind of ordinary good news that holds your day together. My son-in-law was on his phone. He didn't look up once. When I finished, there was silence. And then he looked up from his phone, looked at me, not at Claire, at me, and said, "Do you ever stop talking about yourself? You're retired. You don't do anything. Nobody cares about hospital gossip from 15 years ago." Claire said his name, just once, quietly, like a warning that she already knew wouldn't land. He went back to his phone. I sat there for a moment. I remember looking at my plate, the pot roast I had spent all day making, the table I had set in my own dining room, with the placemats I'd bought in Savannah on a trip I took with my sister in 2017. I put my fork down. I folded my napkin and set it next to my plate. I stood up and said, very quietly, "Excuse me," and I walked to my room. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked out the window at my backyard, the yard I had weeded and watered and planted with peonies every spring for 20-some years, and something settled in me. Not rage. Quieter than rage, like a door closing softly. I took out my phone and I called my sister. Now, I need to explain something about my sister because she's important. Her name is Wanda, and she's 71, and she is the most practical, least dramatic woman I have ever known in my life. She was a paralegal for 25 years. She is the person I call when I need someone to tell me the truth without softening it. I told her everything that night, all of it, not just that night, but the last 3 years. The master bedroom, the reading room, the POA pressure, the comments. The way he spoke to me in my own home like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. She listened without interrupting, which is something Wanda is very good at. When I finished, she said, "Beverly, how long have you been keeping that notebook?" "About 6 months," I said. She said, "Good. Now you need a lawyer. I want to tell you something about the week that followed, because I think this is the part that people don't talk about enough. Making the decision to act is the hardest moment. Not the lawyer's office, not the conversation, not the paperwork. The moment where you decide that you are done accepting the unacceptable. That moment is where most people get stuck. I know because I'd been stuck there for 2.5 years. What moved me was not fury. What moved me was the pot roast. 30 years of double shifts and holiday weekends and never asking anyone for anything, and I had spent all day making a pot roast that no one appreciated in a house that still had my name on the deed. Wanda referred me to an attorney she knew from her paralegal days, a woman who handled elder law, estate planning, and housing disputes. I drove to her office on a Thursday morning while my son-in-law was at work and my grandchildren were at school. I told the attorney everything. I brought the notebook. She was very calm. She asked me several precise questions. Was I the sole owner of the property? Yes. Was there any rental agreement in place? No. Had I ever formally granted any financial authority to my son-in-law or my daughter? No. Was I currently of sound mind and capable of managing my own affairs? She asked it gently, and I answered it plainly. Yes, demonstrably. She explained my options clearly and without drama, which I appreciated. I was the owner of the home. My son-in-law had no legal standing there whatsoever. If I wanted them to leave, I could give them written notice. 30 days was standard, and if they did not vacate, I could pursue formal eviction proceedings. She also said, because she's a thorough woman, that if I ever did decide to grant a PO to anyone, I should know that it could be revoked at any time, in writing, as long as I was competent to do so. I signed no PO that day. I did sign a document authorizing her to send a formal notice of intent to vacate on my behalf. We scheduled it for the following Monday. I went home that Thursday and made dinner again. Spaghetti, nothing special. I sat at the table and I was pleasant. I asked about my grandchildren's school projects. I watched my son-in-law scroll through his phone the way he always did. I went to bed at 9 o'clock and I slept better than I had in months. Friday was quiet. Saturday, my son-in-law went to play golf with a friend. The first time I'd seen him leave the house for something recreational in weeks, which told me things were still feeling easy and comfortable for him. Good. I spent Saturday going through the boxes in my room and pulling out the books I wanted to put back on shelves in my own house, in whatever room I chose. Sunday, we had a normal morning. I made pancakes for the grandchildren. The little one, she's 3, sat in my lap and asked me to read her the same board book 4 times in a row, and I read it 4 times. I held on to that morning. Monday, the letter was delivered by certified mail. I know what happened because Claire called me. I was in my room. I heard the front door, heard the mail, heard the silence that followed. Then I heard my son-in-law's voice, not the words at first, just the tone. That particular pitch that happens when someone who has felt entirely in control suddenly discovers that they are not. Then Claire knocked on my door. She came in and sat on the end of the bed, which is something she hadn't done in a long time. She looked young suddenly and tired. She said, "Mom, what is this?" I said, "It's a notice. It means I'm asking you to make arrangements to move out within 30 days. She stared at me. I said, "I want you to know I love you and I love your children. This is not about that." Then what is it about? I thought about how to answer. I thought about the pot roast and the reading room and the master bedroom and the POA and the 38 years and the 2 hips and the spaghetti I'd eaten 4 nights ago while her husband scrolled his phone in my dining room. I said, "It's about the fact that this is my home." And somewhere along the way, everyone forgot that. She started to cry, and I let her, and I handed her a tissue. And I did not apologize. That was the hardest part. Not the lawyer, not the notice, not what came after. Sitting there and not apologizing for a decision I had every right to make. My son-in-law didn't come to me that day. I think he was too shocked and honestly too calculating. He was already trying to figure out the angles. He came to me 2 days later in the kitchen early morning when he thought he might catch me softer. He sat down at the table, my table, with his coffee and used a tone of voice I can only describe as aggressively reasonable. He said they couldn't find a place in 30 days. He said it wasn't fair to the kids to uproot them mid-school year. He said I was being emotional. I poured myself a cup of coffee and I leaned against the counter and I said, "I appreciate you bringing your concerns to me. You're welcome to put anything you'd like in writing and I'll pass it along to my attorney." The face he made. "I will not forget it." He said, "You have an attorney?" I said, "I do. Her contact information is on the notice." He left the kitchen. I drank my coffee. I want to be clear about how this ended because I know that's what everyone wants to know, and I think there's value in being specific. They didn't leave in exactly 30 days. It was closer to 45, and there was some back and forth through the attorneys about logistics and a few tense weeks in that house where nobody said much to anybody. But they left. They found an apartment 20 minutes away. Actually a decent one, bigger than their old place, in a school district Claire had been wanting anyway. They took their furniture and their kids' toys and the noise and the chaos and the strange, low-grade dread I had been living with for 3 years. The first morning alone in my house, I got up early and I made coffee and I carried it into the living room and I sat in my own chair by my own window in the quiet. And then I went and got the boxes from my room and I started putting my books back on the shelves. I moved back into the master bedroom that weekend. I bought myself new bedding, white, with tiny blue flowers, and I remade the bed with fresh sheets, and I slept in it that night like I was sleeping in it for the first time. Claire and I talk on the phone most weeks now. It's careful, still. There are things between us that will take time. I see my grandchildren on Saturday mornings, which is something we agreed on and which I protect fiercely, because none of what happened was their fault, and they are still the most important people in my life. My son-in-law sent me a message through Claire about 6 weeks after they moved out that said he hoped there were no hard feelings. I didn't respond. I think about what I would tell someone in the situation I was in 2 years ago, still setting the table in a house where no one treated me as though I belonged at it. I would tell them this: document everything, find a Wanda, and understand that patience and tolerance are not the same as permission. Just because you accepted something once doesn't mean you've agreed to accept it forever. I am 67 years old. I own my home. I have 2 replaced hips and a pension and a notebook that I no longer need to write in. And every morning now, I make my coffee, and I sit in my own chair, in my own quiet, in a house that remembers it belongs to me. I still think about that yellow dish towel sometimes, the one with the sunflowers. I dried my hands on it the night everything finally broke open, and I walked to my room and I sat on the edge of a bed in a house that had my name on the deed, and I made a decision without raising my voice or shedding a single tear. People ask me if I regret waiting so long. Honestly, I don't think regret is the right word. I think I needed those 3 years to understand something that took me a long time to see clearly, that kindness, without limits, isn't kindness at all. It's permission. And every time I said nothing, every time I moved my things one room further down the hall, I was signing off on the next thing. Not because I was weak, because I was trying so hard to keep the peace that I forgot I was allowed to have one. What I've learned, what I know now in a way I didn't before, is that doing the right thing and being a pushover can look identical from the outside for a very long time. I kept the peace. I cooked the meals. I gave up the reading room and then the master bedroom and then nearly my own sense of what was mine. And I told myself that was love. Maybe some of it was, but some of it was also fear, dressed up as patience. The decision I made wasn't impulsive. That matters to me. I didn't flip a table or scream or say all the things I'd been holding back for 3 years. I called my sister. I found an attorney. I kept a notebook. I moved slowly, and I moved carefully, and I moved with a clear head. Because the one thing I have never been willing to surrender, not in 38 years of nursing, not in raising a daughter on my own, not in any of it, is my own judgment. My mind has always been the thing I trusted most, and I used it. There's something that happens when a person finally acts in alignment with what they actually know to be true. The noise quiets, the second-guessing stops. I slept better that week than I had in years, not because everything was resolved, but because I had stopped pretending that something wrong was acceptable. I think about my granddaughter sometimes, the little one who asked me to read the same board book 4 times in one morning. She's going to grow up and face situations where someone tries to take something from her slowly, incrementally, in ways that are hard to name. I hope she has a Wanda. I hope she keeps a notebook. And I hope she understands early what took me until 67 to really feel in my bones, that you can love someone completely and still refuse to let them erase you. The house is quiet now in the mornings. My books are back on the shelves. The white bedding with the tiny blue flowers is on my bed in my room, and I make my coffee and I sit by my window, and it is mine. That's not a small thing. That's everything.